Let me tell you something that might sound strange. Some of the loneliest moments don't happen when you're alone. They happen when you're surrounded by people who don't really see you. When you're laughing at jokes that aren't funny, nodding along to conversations that feel hollow, pretending to belong in a room full of strangers who happen to know your name. That's when you realize something. Being alone isn't the problem. Being misunderstood is. And maybe that's why some people have no friends. Not because they can't make them, but because they've learned that bad company is worse than no company. That surface-level connections drain more than they give. That silence is better than being surrounded by people who make you feel invisible. Because here's the truth nobody wants to say out loud. Having no friends doesn't always mean you're broken. Sometimes it means you're selective, self-aware, protective of your peace. And in a world that treats loneliness like a disease, that's hard to admit. We're told that friendships are essential, that if you don't have a crew, a squad, a circle, something must be wrong with you. That isolation is a red flag, a sign of failure, a problem to fix. But what if it's not? What if some people are alone because they've tried connection and found it exhausting? Because they've opened up and been used as entertainment? Because they've been vulnerable and had their secrets turned into jokes? What if solitude isn't a lack of connection? It's a choice born from too many disappointments. See, the people who have no friends aren't always the ones who can't socialize. Often, they're the ones who can. They know how to talk, how to smile, how to play the part. But afterwards, they need days to recover. Because social interaction isn't energizing for them, it's exhausting. And not because people are bad, but because most conversations feel like performances. Small talk, polite laughter, shallow exchanges that never go deeper than the weather or weekend plans. And after years of that, some people just stop trying. They stop calling, stop texting, stop showing up. Not because they don't care, but because they're tired of caring more than everyone else. There's a quiet experiment many of them have done. They stopped reaching out, just to see who would reach back, and the silence was deafening. Weeks went by, then months, then years, and most people never called, never texted, never even noticed they were gone, and that taught them something painful but clarifying. Most friendships were one-sided. They were the glue holding everything together, and the moment they stopped trying, everything fell apart. So they stopped, not out of bitterness, but out of exhaustion, because it's easier to be alone than to carry relationships that were never mutual to begin with. And here's the part people don't understand. They're not lonely when they're alone. They're lonely when they're with people. Because loneliness isn't about being by yourself. It's about being unseen, unheard, misunderstood. You can be in a crowded room and feel completely invisible. You can have 100 acquaintances and 0 real connections. You can be surrounded by people and still feel like no one knows you. That's the loneliness that breaks you. Not the kind that comes from solitude, but the kind that comes from pretending you're not alone standing in a crowd. So some people choose differently. They choose silence over small talk, solitude over shallow company, peace over pretending. And society calls that sad, calls it antisocial, calls it a problem. But maybe it's not. Maybe it's wisdom. Because here's what they've learned. Not everyone deserves access to you. Not every connection is worth maintaining. And sometimes protecting your peace means letting people go, even if it means being alone. Psychologists talk about something called relational fatigue. It's what happens when the cost of maintaining relationships outweighs the benefit, when every interaction leaves you drained instead of energized, when you start dreading the people who are supposed to bring you joy. And for people with no friends, that's often the breaking point. They've experienced enough shallow friendships, enough betrayals, enough disappointments to realize it's better to have no friends than bad friends. Because bad friends do damage. They take your vulnerabilities and turn them into punchlines. They show up when they need something and disappear when you do. They treat you like a prop, a convenience, an option. And after enough of that, you stop opening the door. Not because you're cold, but because you've been burned too many times. And that's not antisocial, that's self-preservation. Now let's talk about something deeper. Some people have no friends because they value truth over comfort, and truth makes people uncomfortable. They're the ones who can't fake enthusiasm, who won't laugh at jokes they don't find funny, who won't pretend to agree just to keep the peace. And in a world that rewards performance, that makes them difficult. People don't want honesty, they want validation. They don't want depth, they want distraction. They don't want real connection, they want someone to like their posts. And people who value authenticity can't do that. They can't play pretend. They can't paste on a smile when they're falling apart. They can't be enthusiastic about things that feel meaningless. So they're labeled as negative, difficult, too intense, too serious. And eventually, people stop inviting them. Not because they're bad people, but because they make people feel things. And most people don't want to feel. They want to escape. So the truth tellers, the deep thinkers, the emotionally honest ones, they end up alone. Not by choice necessarily, but by consequence of being real in a world that prefers fiction.
And here's the thing, they're not broken. They're just living in a world that wasn't built for them. A world that values quantity over quality, likes over depth, noise over substance. And in that world, having no friends sometimes means you're one of the few people still holding on to something real. But it's not always peaceful, because even when you choose solitude, there are moments when it hurts. Moments when you see groups laughing and wonder what it would be like to belong. Moments when everyone else seems to have someone and you're still alone. And in those moments, the doubt creeps in. Is something wrong with me? Am I too much? Not enough? Will I always be alone? And the answer is complicated. Because no, there's nothing wrong with you, but yes, you might always be alone. Not because you're unlovable, but because real connection is rare. And if you're someone who refuses to settle for anything less, you might spend a long time searching, or a long time alone. But here's what you gain in that solitude. You learn who you are without the noise of other people's opinions. You learn what you actually like, not what you're supposed to like. You learn to sit with yourself without distraction, and that's a kind of strength most people never develop. Because most people can't be alone. They fill every silence with noise, every empty moment with company, every quiet thought with distraction. They're terrified of being with themselves. Because when it's just you and your thoughts, you can't hide. You have to face who you really are, and that's uncomfortable. But people with no friends have already done that work. They've sat in the silence, they've faced themselves, and they've made peace with it. So when they choose to be alone, it's not because they're afraid of people, it's because they're no longer afraid of themselves. And that's power. Not the kind the world celebrates, but the quiet, unshakable kind that comes from self-acceptance. Now, there's another side to this. Some people have no friends because they were hurt, betrayed, used, and they built walls so high that no one can climb them anymore. They learned early that people are dangerous, that vulnerability is a weapon others will use against you, that secrets become jokes, that pain becomes gossip, that trust is a luxury they can't afford. So they stopped trusting, stopped sharing, stopped letting anyone in. Not because they don't want connection, but because the cost of connection has always been too high. And now, even when someone safe comes along, they can't open the door. The lock is rusted shut, the walls are too thick, the fear is too deep. And that's the tragedy of it, because they're not choosing solitude, they're trapped in it, haunted by old wounds that never healed. And if that's you, I need you to hear this. You're not broken. You're protecting yourself the only way you know how. And that's not weakness, it's survival. But survival isn't the same as living. And at some point, you have to ask yourself, are these walls keeping people out, or are they keeping you in? Because healing doesn't mean letting everyone in. It means learning to tell the difference between people who are safe and people who aren't. It means lowering the walls for the right people, not tearing them down for everyone. And that takes time and courage and a lot of trial and error. But it's possible. You don't have to stay alone forever, unless you want to. And if you do, that's okay too. Because here's the final truth. Some people are meant for solitude. Not because they're damaged, but because they operate differently. They find peace in silence, fulfillment in their own company, joy in things that don't require an audience. They don't need people to validate their existence. They don't need constant interaction to feel alive. They don't need friendships to feel whole. And in a world obsessed with connection, that's rare. But it's not wrong. Because the goal isn't to have friends. The goal is to have a life that feels meaningful to you. And if that life is quiet, solitary, and small, but it's yours, then it's enough. So if you have no friends, don't let the world tell you you're broken. You're not. You're just someone who values depth over crowds, truth over performance, peace over pretending. And maybe you're still healing. Maybe you're still figuring out who's safe. Maybe you're still learning that not everyone will hurt you. But until then, it's okay to be alone. It's okay to be selective. It's okay to protect your peace. Because you're not missing out. You're just waiting for something real. And that's worth the wait.